This is the United States Energy Association Power Sector Podcast. I'm Herman K. Trabish. I've covered the power sector since 2006, and I currently report for Utility Dive. In this episode of the USEA podcast series on the future of energy policy, we're going to talk about what to expect in the power sector under the incoming presidential administration and new Congress as new resources, spiking electricity demand, and extreme weather events add unprecedented stress to the U.S. power system. World Resources Institute Director Lori Bird is going to discuss what could happen to existing Inflation Reduction Act tax credits, potential of the new technology neutral tax credit, and the possibility of new approaches to permitting. Lori has headed up the World Resources Institute U.S. Energy Program and held WRI's distinguished Polsky Chair for Renewable Energy for over 6 years. He's led initiatives in transportation electrification, system flexibility, new market design, and utility decarbonization, among other things. Before she came to the WRI, she worked for over 26 years in research, including 19 years as principal analyst with DOE's National Renewable Energy Laboratory, focusing on renewable energy policy, markets, and renewable grid integration. So, with all of that knowledge, Lori, do you think the IRA tax credits for utility scale and distributed clean energy resources are going to be subject to significant change, like a reduction in compensation, an acceleration of the phase out, or a change in the requirements for domestic content? Or do you think the new leaders will recognize the importance of the IRA benefits to everybody in the country?
Well, it's difficult to predict the future, so let me just start there.
Yeah.
But I will say that I think it's hard to repeal the tax credits because it requires congressional action. So it's
Mm,
easier to make changes to implementing guidance than it is to repeal the credits. And there has been Republican support in Congress for the tax credits, and that there have been a lot of benefits that are accruing in Republican districts across the country. In fact, a lot of, a majority of the benefits are accruing there. So there are reasons that these may be maintained going forward. Also, historically, the tax credits have enjoyed bipartisan support. So with all of that, I think there is some optimism that we may retain these going forward, but there could be modifications to them. That's certainly very, very possible, and there is a lot of discussion of really of trying to undo a lot of what's in the Inflation Reduction Act. But I think that some of the other factors that influence how this may play out are some of the factors playing out in the electricity sector right now, uh, in terms of record load growth, right? We're seeing just tremendous demand for electricity because of AI data centers, manufacturing needs, and electrification, right? And it's putting a lot of pressure on the system, a lot of need for new power generation, new transmission as well. And so we really are needing a lot of new generation sources on the grid as quickly as possible to meet all this demand. Um, and there's, I think, a lot of interest in trying to have a diversity of power sources really come online to meet that. So all of those factors, I think, bode well for maintaining some level of the tax credits going forward. And I
mm,
say a couple of things too about the importance that clean energy sources like wind and solar can be developed very quickly, um, compared to building, large scale natural gas plant or other large scale generating units, right? So maintaining incentives to be able to get these sources that we can deploy quickly, that could be really beneficial to systems too. We want to make sure that we are economically competitive, right? That we have energy security, energy independence, all of these things resonate, I think, with both parties in terms of making sure that our grid and our electricity supply are robust and able to meet the country's electricity needs.
you've kind of anticipated my next question, but let me ask it this way. There was a flurry of development activity at the end of 2024, uh, and there's a 4-year allowance to complete projects that began construction in that period. So, do you think that will help protect deployment of those kinds of projects and their tax credits? Uh, that's could be valuable because, as you say, we're going to need those kinds of projects and things that have already gotten started because of load growth, and they are low priced, right? And they can be deployed, as you say, quickly. So, do you think all that will make investment in them important and significant, even if the policy incentives do change a little?
Yeah, we did see a flurry of activity at the end of 2024 in particular, and projects that began construction in 2024 would be rather grandfathered into being able to claim the tax credits if they're placed into service within 4 years. So, likely it depends the nature of any changes. So even if the future tax credits, the technology neutral tax credits were modified, the Section 48 tax credits could be maintained there. So yes, I think there's a lot of momentum there. I think there has been historical resistance to going back and affecting projects that are underway, right? Within Congress, there's usually when policy changes are made, there is consideration of investments that have already been made. We've heard that from some of the Republican leadership too, that they're concerned about that. There were 18 Republicans that signed a letter, indicating that they didn't want to repeal the tax credits, and they also mentioned this concern about not impacting projects and development that was underway because it hurts business and so forth, right? So there's
Hmm.
usually a lot of interest in not creating that kind of instability for markets and companies, right? It just destabilizes the economy. So it's likely, typically we see some sort of grandfathering if there's going to be a change, and I would anticipate that. I mean, you don't know. I mean, we could, this administration may do things that we haven't seen in the past. So it is possible, but that is typical of when there are major changes like that. I think some of the other things that are really important. I've already talked about the load growth issue, but data centers, their load growth in particular, many of the companies that are developing these data centers that need them are tech companies that have commitments to clean energy, and they're trying to actively figure out how to power these facilities with clean energy sources and are doing all kinds of contracts to make that happen, right? So, and I think we're going to continue to see a lot of momentum in that space. We're seeing a lot of contracts for solar projects with storage to meet them, and even nuclear generation contracts as well. But I think that's going to continue. These companies have commitments. They've been taking, spending substantial resources to make sure that clean energy is coming online to fuel their demand. So I think we'll continue to see that.
Yeah. I know WRI has done one of the first organizations, I think, to really dig into and try to point out the value of getting large investors, large users, energy users, to invest in certain kinds of projects. And, so your insight into the idea that they're going to be building because the prices are low and the resources can be deployed quickly to meet load growth is very valuable. But I want to move now to another aspect of this question of what's going to happen under the new administration. The uh, IRA provides for a technology neutral tax credit, and it became active January 1st of this year. But the question is, will the new Congress, with their ideas about uh, renewables, change it to drive more natural gas or hydrogen with carbon capture, or to drive more advanced nuclear and advanced geothermal? I know in the hearings for Secretary of Energy, the new Secretary of Energy, he talked about advanced geothermal and advanced nuclear a lot. Um, or will the need for demand growth to meet the need to meet demand growth just make the need for everything the key driver here?
Yeah, I think there is demand for all of the above carbon-free technologies. The thing I think that is appealing about the technology neutral tax credits is that they are inclusive, that they include a lot of technologies. If you can meet the criteria for zero carbon, then they're eligible for the tax credits, right? And so the idea here is to be incentivizing the least cost or most valuable technologies for the grid, and not being too prescriptive about exactly what those technologies are. They even enable new technologies to potentially get the tax credits if they can be certified and show that they meet the zero carbon thresholds. So we just saw the guidance come out from the Biden administration on the tax neutral tax credits just recently. And they're science-based in terms of doing the calculations of the life cycle emissions, and that's great to see. We could see modification of those rules going forward about how the calculations are done, how technology eligibility could be shifted. So that is within the realm of something that could happen. But do I think, would be continued support for these? There's an argument, I think, that, trying to do something technology neutral that's inclusive is bipartisan in nature. It does include some of these technologies that are more favorable to the new administration. So, and it's letting them compete against each other in terms of what's needed in the marketplace, what's least cost, what's really needed in terms of baseload generation or other things for the grid and so forth. So they're market based, which is often something that is appealing to Republican administrations and has bipartisan support. So I think all of those things bode well for the tech neutral tax credits, and we do see advanced nuclear, geothermal, carbon capture included in them.
Yeah, yeah. And there's a lot of confusion over uh, what some people in the new administration actually think about the climate crisis, but with Los Angeles burning and the Carolinas recently drowning, um, we do have concern about doing something that will offer the free market an opportunity, but at the same time do something about emissions. So if you want to build a natural gas plant and you can capture carbon, you have a right to compete, right?
Yeah, I think it's been interesting to watch or hear the highlights of the testimony from the confirmation hearings recently
Yeah,
about what are the opinions on climate change. And we are hearing Chris Wright, the energy secretary nominee, acknowledging climate change, saying it's a real issue, it's a global issue, and it's a challenge that we need to that is there and needs to be addressed, right? And
yeah,
Lee Zeldin also acknowledging that. Um,
yeah, yeah, exactly. So that that acknowledgement fits very well with the idea of a technology neutral tax credit, as you pointed out. I want to get to one more question, Lori, before we complete this. This is the last question. I've seen studies recently that suggest that it's local and not federal permitting and regulatory impediments that are slowing deployment. So we saw Manchin Barrasso defeated, but do you think that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission or the new Congress will do something to accelerate permitting and regulatory reforms to enable more renewables, or maybe just to do something that everybody agrees we need, which is to add to electric system reliability? Do you see that coming in this next year or this next administration?
yeah, it does seem that there's continued interest in doing permitting reform in the new administration. It may take a little bit more of a back seat to some of the other priority issues that need to be handled first that are going to take a little bit of time. So it might be a little bit slower. There was a big push to try to get some permitting reform done by the end of last year, and
Yeah,
came closer than I think some people thought it would. So I do think there's still momentum there. Permitting is a barrier. I mean, we need to build a lot of generation quickly. We need to build transmission quickly as well. Um, and so the extent that we are able to speed up processes, reduce redundancy, increase coordination across agencies, that kind of thing can be helpful. And I think there's interest in trying to find those kinds of solutions that still continue to protect the environment, but can reduce the red tape, reduce the time needed to do so. So I think that's going to be part of the discussion going forward. Something that was in the Manchin-Barrasso bill that I think that's interesting was, because it wasn't just permitting reform, it had interregional transmission planning provisions in it too, which were really important, I think, as well, right? And the fact that we need more transmission on the system. Chris Wright in his hearing did acknowledge the need for upgrading the transmission system and expanding it, including building new lines and expanding existing lines. So it seems to recognize the importance of that, particularly given our current situation of just trying to get lots of new generation on the grid, and even the interconnection queues that we currently have that are slowing things down. So permitting, is not the only barrier. Getting things on the grid and interconnected to the grid, that's been a big challenge too, that slowed down a lot of progress. And hopefully that discussion will also continue as part of these discussions. It's not necessarily exactly permitting reform, it's other things as well. But
yeah. Well, it seems to me that in the last administration, we saw a lot of new possibilities presented. And in this administration, we're going to see a lot of opportunities to take advantage of those possibilities if people realize what those possibilities are. But nobody knows exactly, right? There's a lot of uncertainty at this point. Isn't that true?
Yeah, it's a wait and see. I think we're getting signals and kind of understanding the positions of the folks who are going to be leading agencies and so forth. So that gives us more clues. But it's a very tight Congress, right?
Yes.
Which will make the dynamics really interesting.
An interesting time to be following the power sector, and that's what our listeners are doing. I got to thank my guest, World Resources Institute Director Lori Bird. She's provided some wonderful insights into what to expect through the uncertainty in the power sector policy under the incoming presidential administration and the new Congress. As always, I also want to thank our listeners for taking the time to check out the USEA Power Sector Podcast, which is, by the way, now available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with everybody you know our quest for energy transition solutions.